Well, welcome once again to another hour of the Legislature Today radio show. We are at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar in downtown Bismarck, and going to kick off another hour of the show. Dale Wetzel, managing editor from Great Plains News, here to recap what happened in the Legislature today, plus some very special guests. I want to tell you also, speaking of the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar, it's Teeny Tuesday. That means every Tuesday, actually. The award-winning martinis are 2 for $1, and all of their appetizers are $2 off. So that's every Tuesday, 5 to 10 p.m., right here at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar. And their appetizers are fabulous. They are really extraordinary. Great food at the Peacock. Come on down and enjoy. As I mentioned, we have some great guests that we're going to get to here momentarily. But first and foremost, let's introduce the managing editor for Great Plains News, Dale Wetzel, to recap what happened in the Legislature today. Dale, give us a little rundown.
Thank you, Scott. It is a dangerous evening indeed with 2 for $1 martinis at the Peacock Alley. We're here to speak to 3 legislators about tax cut proposals. And first of all, let's get to what happened in the legislature today. It was an interesting evening or morning in the legislative hearings. There was one of the hearings dealt with a new state program that's being contemplated about how to identify children and adults with autism. There are several bills that are going to be contemplated that would provide money for teacher training to spot children with autism. Also, a program to identify ways to treat autism, and also provide vouchers to help treat people with autism. Essentially, it's advertised as a public-private partnership as a way to spend the state dollars most efficiently in the treatment of autism. Also, there was a rather interesting bill dealing with ways to cut down on gas flaring, natural gas flaring in western North Dakota. A great deal of our natural gas production is wasted because we don't have sufficient infrastructure set up to gather it and process it. And one of the ways to try to cut down on the amount of gas that's wasted is to encourage, through a tax incentive, the establishment of small processing plants at the wellhead. They're about the size of a semi-trailer. They can be used to make anhydrous ammonia and a number of other products, and that is a way that we could try to use more of the natural gas as it's intended, rather than just waste it and burn it up. In the meantime, we have 3 gentlemen here tonight that we're going to be discussing tax proposals. Some of them have introduced some. All of them have ideas, have heard ideas from constituents, have ideas of their own that we're going to talk about with them. First, we have Representative Scott Lauser from Minot. He's serving in his 2nd session. He has a bill that he's introduced that would suspend the state income tax for 2 years. Welcome, Mr. Lauser. We have Craig Hedlund, who has a bill that essentially would preserve favorable tax treatment for dividend income and capital gains income as part of the North Dakota income tax. And we have Senator Jim Dotson-Rod. The 2 gentlemen I introduced previously, Mr. Hedlund and Mr. Lauser, they are Republicans. Mr. Dotson-Rod is a Democrat, and in the 1980s, Mr. Dotson-Rod, when the North Dakota Democrats controlled the Senate, and yes, there was a time when this did indeed happen, Mr. Dotson-Rod was the chairman of the Finance and Tax Committee, so he's extremely well-versed in the subject we're going to be discussing. Welcome, gentlemen.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Lauser, could you discuss your bill about the suspension of the income tax for 2 years and why you decided to put that option forward?
Well, there was a number of options. I had talked to a number of constituents, and one of the thoughts that was interesting to me was to take the tax rates to 0. Rather than eliminate the tax, but take the tax rates to 0, which would allow for some of the carry forward credits and that sort of thing that people had been planning on. Over the course of discussion, it just came out that maybe this was a more palatable way to to focus on the income tax and reduce the tax burden for the taxpayers in North Dakota. So we're looking at a 2-year suspension and then reevaluate this after we come back in 2 years.
You mentioned, can you explain a bit more the difference between just getting rid of the income tax or taking the tax rate to zero and suspending the income tax?
Well,
what's the difference there?
Taking the income tax to zero or changing the rates at all would be changing the law. In this case, it's just suspending what's already in law, and we would revisit this again in 2 years.
And why is that an advantage in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a way to, I would hope that it's a way to demonstrate to the legislature that perhaps this tax is not necessary in the future, a responsible way of doing that.
Do you have any idea how much the income tax raises in 2 years?
Well, I guess if we tried to project that 2 years ago, and we did, we'd be off because of the tremendous growth in the state. Current projections are over $1 billion. So this is, I've heard anywhere from a 1.1 billion to 1.4 billion in projected revenue over 2 years.
Of the state income tax?
Correct.
Oh, that's a lot of money. Mr. Hedlund, your bill essentially preserves favorable treatment for investment income such as capital gains and dividends. Could you explain how that would work?
Well, what we've done with this bill, and let me start and preface this by saying the bill today in its current form really doesn't do anything because of what happened with the fiscal cliff negotiations in Washington. The reason I submitted the bill is because all the chatter coming out of Washington and the need for more revenue, the president stated publicly that he thought that dividends was one area he could increase revenue and that maybe they should be taxed as ordinary income. In North Dakota, we're flush with revenue. I saw no need for us to automatically have those increases put upon our citizens here in the state. So what we did is we drafted legislation that essentially, had they gone to that of taxing of ordinary or dividends as ordinary income, we automatically would have followed. This would have prevented that, and as a compromise, somewhat of a compromise, the tax department came up with what they felt would have been a revenue-neutral proposal, and our dividend income would have been reduced by 20%, but it would have been expanded to all dividends. Our current law is just a 30% reduction on qualified dividends.
One of the things that resulted from the fiscal cliff resolution, so to speak, is there is still favorable treatment of dividends and capital gains, but the rate is higher. Does your bill keep that higher? I mean, does it mimic that higher rate?
Well, what it does is it does not. It keeps our current law in place, so our dividends will still receive that 30% reduction. Now, we did have the hearing on the bill today, and there was public support for the bill as it is, but a citizen did offer what he thought would be a favorable amendment that would essentially mirror what the federal government has done on the lower income end. Now, we're going to take a look at that, and I've got the tax department putting together exactly what the federal law has done, and then we will see if the proposed amendment that he would like to see fits our legislation.
So basically you would have less of a tax rate on capital gains and dividends if they're earned by someone who's making below a particular amount of money?
Yes, that's correct. And, I can't state what those income levels are because I have not read the federal legislation. But, yeah, I think what I understand is there would be a zero tax on those dividends and capital gains if you qualify, if you're in that range of income.
Could you just talk for a moment about why is it that dividends and capital gains, why, in your opinion, do they deserve a favorable tax rate?
Well, first of all, dividends and capital gains come from investment. Investment generally has been taxed at the level, the corporate level once, and then when it's passed on to the investor, it's taxed again. And, to tax it again as ordinary income, I don't think is fairness. I think it would discourage investment, and therefore I think I think history has shown when we have lower taxes on dividends and capital gains, revenues increase.
Senator Dotson-Rod, first of all, did you have anything that you wanted to say about the proposals we discussed? And also, do you have any proposals that you plan to offer or that some of your colleagues in the Senate plan to offer?
Well, the legislature this time around is going to have to look at a lot of tax cut proposals. We're going to have more proposals to reduce taxes than we'll have ability to accept and to pass. So we're going to have to sort of prioritize and see what it is that we think makes the most sense, that the public seems to have the most desire for, and that makes sense for us economically. And I'm on the tax committee this time around, and so we'll be holding hearings and taking into consideration some of these ideas. Right now, it appears to me that as we go through this session, we're going to see three distinct trends that'll kind of characterize this session. One will be a bipartisan willingness and desire to do something to reduce taxes on property. And another will be that I think when it's done, we're going to more fully fund education than we have probably ever. We're going to have we'll do a better job at primary and secondary and at the higher education end to fund education. And the third thing is, I think, on roads, as far as the infrastructure development and roads, that trend toward one-time expenditures that we can identify with the kind of wealth that we have today, we're going to see more of a willingness to do that. I think to fund the road projects that they were identified in the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute study of the non-oil counties, we're still short in the funding that came in the governor's budget by $40 or $50 million. So I'm hoping that we can add to that. So I see these three trends: property tax reductions, more funding for education, and funding for roads. Those three things I think we'll see when the session is over. Those are the things that we've done in this session. As far as reducing taxes, from my own point of view, I don't see any reason for us to be looking at reducing income tax. And I know the governor has in his budget an income tax reduction. I hear no, in my district and around the state, I hear no grousing or complaining about the taxes on income. We have one of the lowest income taxes in the nation. If I were to have an equivalent amount of dollars, I would put them into property tax reductions or into infrastructure development. So that's I guess my orientation or view on income tax. On capital gains and dividend income, right now we give it a 30% exclusion, favorable treatment on dividends and capital gains over ordinary income. And as far as I'm concerned, that is probably adequate. We do have an obligation here to keep taxes low. And I think that's been something that North Dakota's done a pretty good job of over the years. The legislature, the governor together have strived to keep our overall tax environment favorable to business and our taxes low. And I think we're going to continue in that direction. As far as any further attempts to try to make our taxes on capital gains or income or dividends any more favorable than they are now, I guess, I'm sort of in the camp of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and those people are saying that I really don't understand why labor, if you separate labor and capital, that why you would try to give more favorable treatment to capital over labor. And you're familiar with the famous quotes from Buffett about his cleaning lady paying more on her income tax than he does on his in terms of a share of his income. So that my orientation is toward giving the tax reductions that we currently have in law, trying to maintain those as we go forward, and using any of the revenues that we have for expenses that don't create structural deficits for us, that allow for one-time spending, and to keep our tax environment overall as low as we can. I guess that's the way I would view any of the proposals on income, sales, or the capital gains or dividends.
What do you think about this idea of suspending the income tax? In my experience in the legislature, I don't think that's ever been proposed for a temporary suspension of the income tax essentially a test drive of what North Dakota looks like without an income tax?
You know, if I was given a choice between what the governor has offered, which is to reduce the rates on income tax, or this 2-year suspension or reduction to zero, I would go with the 2-year suspension to zero if I had to choose between the two. Because if you lower the rates, as we're talking about, those are permanent rate reductions. And, you know, we are all operating under the assumption that the good times that we have today with oil and $85, $90 a barrel, that's permanent. That's just the way it's going to be. And I'm very optimistic about North Dakota's future. And we've got some tremendous things going on in addition to what's going on in the oil patch. But
you were here in the 80s when things were not that great, huh?
We've seen other industries, and there are things, if you look into the technological developments that are coming in the future with, you know, the most of the oil, most of our fossil fuels are really going into transportation. You know, we can heat our homes with some alternatives, and we can use energy, the energy we have, if it gets expensive, we can find alternatives. But transportation, we really are highly dependent on fossil fuels. And as far as that goes, we don't know if there's going to be a hydrogen car or a fuel cell car or some developments technologically that in the future could shift the ground underneath us. Right now, we've got a good path ahead of us, and things look great.
Mr. Lauser, aside from what you've introduced already, I imagine that you might have additional ideas of your own, and also you've heard of things that you're forming opinions on. What sort of other proposals have you heard in terms of cutting taxes, and what do you think of them?
Oh, well, with regard to personal income tax, there's going to be a number of proposals just to take the rates lower, as the senator mentioned. And I think he had a good analysis on 3 of the areas that are going to be focused in this session. Property taxes, we're going to see a number of proposals. And the concern that I've got in my background in real estate is that the legislature does not assess, collect, levy, or spend with regard to property taxes, but we're providing this relief. And that relief grows every 2 years. And so I'd like to see a way to provide a system that provides permanent reductions in property taxes, but is not a buy down from the legislature. The governor's proposal may do that with education. I've got another idea that is probably thinking outside the box. It would require a constitutional amendment. It hasn't come out yet, but would allow for that same an equivalent amount of the buy down to go directly to the property owner. But I'd like to restrict it to people that are citizens of the state and not out-of-state property owners. So there's going to be a number of proposals to look at.
What about, Mr. Hadlin, what do you think about the idea of kind of limiting these tax cuts to people who live in North Dakota or people who own property in North Dakota for the purpose of living here?
Well, the idea on its face seems logical, but I think we have run into some problems in ideas from the past that we've been told probably don't cut constitutional muster. So, you know, we have to be careful when we move forward in those areas. But there is one thing that Senator Dotson-Rod mentioned as when he was talking about dividends and the need to reduce further from where we are. You know, I think the only reason that we would look at lower incomes is because we would try to create an environment to encourage those people to try and save. And I think that's important. I think people need to learn how to save money. You know, I don't know, but this generation seems to want everything, and they want it now. And if there's anything that we could do as government to encourage savings, I think that has merit, and it should be looked at.
You mentioned, I believe you mentioned earlier, that you have a income tax proposal of your own. Would you care to describe that?
I do. I've got a proposal that I've submitted. It's House Bill 1250 that will reduce individual, corporate income taxes. It will reduce the revenue to the state of North Dakota by 35%. And we do that by compressing brackets in individual. We reduce from 5 to 3. I think the bottom bracket comes in at 0.9% of income, and from my recollection, I believe the top one is 2.5%. In the corporate, We keep the bottom level at 1.68%. We do increase the income that you can generate at that rate from $25,000 to $50,000, and then we end up with a second rate of 3.3%, I believe.
One thing I want to kind of close with tonight, gentlemen, is one of the debates that we've heard at the federal level is, there's a great percentage of taxpayers in the nation do not pay federal income tax for one reason or another. Should everyone, if we have a state income tax in North Dakota, should everyone pay some of it? Mr. Lauser, would you care to start with that?
Well, I guess if we kept the type of system that we have now, where it's brackets, there's probably going to be exemptions for the lowest income. If we had a flat tax, that would take care of it, and I'm not aware of any proposals that would do that this session. So,
what do you think, Mr. Hedlund? Should everyone have to pay at least a little bit of income tax? What do you think about that?
Well, today I think that there are some certain individuals in those very low income levels that probably are not paying any state income tax. That's a philosophical discussion that maybe would be better suited for another time. But yeah, I think really in order for government to work properly, everybody probably should have a little skin in it.
What about you, Mr. Dutton?
Well, you may have seen these charts, Dale, that show that if you take all the taxes that people pay, sales tax, property tax, income tax, self-employment tax, that people on the low income end actually pay a greater share of their income into the tax collecting system than people that have higher incomes. So yes, it's true. They're poor maybe, they don't have much money, so they don't pay much into the income tax system. But if you look at the total taxes that they pay as they go through their life, they're paying tax. They're paying taxes.
That was Senator Jim Dodson, Rod. We also have had this evening Representative Scott Lauser of Minot and Representative Craig Hedlund of Montpelier. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Thank you. More coming up on the Legislature Today radio show after a short time out. We're at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar. It's Teeny Tuesday. The award-winning martinis are 2 for $1. Apps are $2 off until 10 tonight at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar, downtown Bismarck. Will continue after this time out. And we are back with more of the Legislature Today radio show and a new round of guests to cover what's happening in the 63rd Assembly of the North Dakota Legislative Session. We're at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar for our listeners in and around Bismarck-Mandan. You're welcome to join us. We're down here each and every night, Monday through Thursday night during the legislative session. And don't forget, an all-new Saturday edition of the Legislature Today radio show can be heard right here on 550 KFire, as well as our affiliates in Fargo, AM 1100, and in the Oil Patch on Talk Radio 1090 The Flag in the Patch as well. So Monday through Thursday nights, Saturdays 10 to noon on the Legislature Today radio shows. Here once again is the managing editor for Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner, Dale Wetzel, to introduce our next round of guests. Dale?
Thank you, Scott. We have with us this evening Senator Joan Heckerman of New Rockford. She's the Assistant Senate Democratic Leader. We have Senator Tim Mathern, a Democrat from Fargo, a former candidate for governor. And back in the days when Democrats were in control of the North Dakota Senate, and yes, those days did exist.
They certainly did.
He was the chairman of the Senate Human Services Committee. We have Representative Al Wieland from West Fargo, a Republican. He was the chairman of a legislative interim committee that studied the subject that we're going to be discussing for the next half hour, which is autism spectrum disorder and how to recognize it in children, how to offer therapy for it, and how to pay for all of this. First of all, Representative Wieland, could you discuss for us how these bills came to be? We're talking about basically 3 bills. One of them would provide money to the Department of Public Instruction for, money to establish a voucher program to provide treatment for children and adults with autism spectrum disorder. We also have a bill to provide money to the Department of Health and the Department of Public Instruction to provide teacher training so that teachers are better able to recognize and manage students with autism, and also to establish a registry of people who have autism as a disability, so that we know how the extent of the problem we're talking about. And then there's also a bill to continue a study of the problem itself. And could you just tell us how these bills came to be, because you are familiar with the extended study that resulted in these proposals?
Well, thank you, Dale. The study was the interim study on human services. We studied not only the autism spectrum, but we also did some guardianship, and we did some other studies that were involved in there, but were, I think, a little more minor in comparison to the autism study. And we, as a committee, came out with the 3 bills. The first one, as you stated, is a continuation of the study, because we feel that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on what the autism spectrum is producing. We're told that there are anywhere from 1 child out of 58 up to 1 child out of 110 that is born with the spectrum today. And if that's the case, that's a lot of kids, and so we need to be watchful of that and so forth. So the 3 bills, the other bill, and you mentioned both of them. One is to provide $198,000 to the DPI for providing information on how teachers and other people that work in the school system can deal with children and recognize when they have this situation. And then the last one, of course, is the grants program, which would provide some dollars for some treatment for individuals that have it.
I understand this voucher approach is fairly unique in the country. Could you explain a bit how this might work?
Well, it is kind of unique, and as far as I know, I think when Dr. Stanton was testifying, she did mention one other state that I think was doing it. I'm not sure if it was New Hampshire or Vermont.
And Dr. Stanton is an expert at Prairie St. John's in Fargo.
Yes, she is, and then she deals with autism. That is her area. And when she testified today, she did talk about that. It would provide services for up to the amount of money that's in there now could provide services for up to 150 people, and the cost is estimated to be somewhere around $27,000 to $30,000 annually. So there's a 2-year time frame in there, and so $4.50 is in the bill at the present time.
Essentially, Dale, the voucher system is a method wherein you have dollars available, and then the family decides where to get those services, and the state pays for the services. Instead of hiring state staff to provide these services, a voucher is essentially a family has the ability to go and buy those services wherever they want.
How do you think that approach is advantageous?
Well, I think it has the potential of being more creative. Different kinds of things might develop in different parts of the state, and families themselves have different points of view as to what works and what doesn't work. You know, autism is a type of disability where this year we will diagnose more people to have autism than AIDS, diabetes, and cancer combined. So it is really a phenomena that we need to address in creative ways. Now, it's not the only thing we can do. We can have public services outside the voucher system, but the voucher system is a potential way of letting families be more creative about where to get services and how to make sure their children have those services.
Senator Heckman, you're a classroom teacher.
Yes, I am.
I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, I guess, but I'm presuming that you probably have had children in your class who had autism. And
that's correct. I was a special education teacher for about 25 years, and in that time, probably even before the diagnosis came through, the ability to evaluate and place children in the correct category, I was serving children with autism, and I have since that time.
How difficult is it to discern whether a child has autism, and how useful is training going to be of a classroom teacher to spot the signs?
Well, actually, there's training out there right now. Some of the schools have teachers that are certified for teaching autism. The University of North Dakota has an autism certification program, and that they are sending out trained staff out to the schools in North Dakota and surrounding areas. The Department of Public Instruction does a lot of training. Autism doesn't have a specific category right now, so a lot of individuals who teach special education across the spectrum as far as speech and language, OT, a lot of people are involved with the student that has autism or a child with autism.
Could you talk about the challenges that are faced by trying to teach a child with autism? What is it about the spectrum that makes it more difficult for a child to learn?
Probably one of the most noticeable things for a lot of children on the spectrum is their inability to cope with the daily social skills that are needed. They have a lot of speech and language difficulties, communication skills. There is a wide range of disability levels on the spectrum. From very, very mild, there are many people out in the world of work today that have some characteristics of autism. And then there are some that are very severe, some children that are very severe and need more therapy than others do. But I always go back to the premise that every child has some abilities that they are good at. And that's one thing that I always look for in the classroom, is find the abilities of the child and start to use that to work with their disabilities.
Representative Whelan, what was it like to go through the study? How familiar were you with autism spectrum disorder before this started, and what did you learn that you think may not be general public knowledge or might be surprising to the public? Because one argument that I've heard is that autistic children are simply poorly behaved, that there's nothing wrong with them, maybe that a swat on the bottom wouldn't cure, and that's somewhat whatever. But could you just describe what you learned about the spectrum in the course of this study that you think that might be interesting to the public?
Well, the first thing is I had no background with autistic children at all. I didn't know any. I didn't have no members of my family that were involved. So I had no background at all, and I suspect a great many members of the committee did not either, because nobody spoke of their experiences in dealing with these children. I did learn an awful lot, and I think there's an awful lot more that can be learned from people. But one of the most interesting things that happened to us is that we had a young man came and testified before our committee, and he also testified today, although not nearly as much as he had before. He's now 13 years old. He's extremely bright. He probably can do things with computers that I will never ever be able to do because I didn't work with computers at a young age, and I just can imagine that he's going to be phenomenal at it. When he first came into our committee, he had trouble with being there. it's a part of the social thing that Senator Heckman mentioned, that he was nervous about being there. So they didn't bring him into the room until he was ready to talk, and then they removed him from the room as soon as he was done, because it was some part of what they have. Today, however, when he testified, he sat in the room the entire time with his grandmother, and then came up with her and talked. And I saw, in that 6 or 8 months, I saw a great improvement in this young man. And his grandmother said it's because he's had some people that have been working with him, some people that have been training him in some way or teaching him in some way so that he could do this, as compared to when he was in the 3rd and the 4th grade. He hated school. He was bullied, all of that. He said now he has friends. He's just so much happier to be in school today than he was then.
Yeah, the young man that you're referring to, he speaks like an adult. Sure. He has adult sentences, adult vocabulary, and frankly, an adult bearing, I thought. Yeah. He's sitting there with his grandmother, and he's talking, and she's talking, and you wouldn't know that he has any sort of learning disability, but his grandmother said about him that he's extremely sensitive, and he said this himself, the young man. He's extremely sensitive to noise. He thinks that, to him, being in a gym class, for example, is like being in a room with a bunch of shrieking monkeys, because it is so loud to him. A pencil sharpener sounds like a buzzsaw. And it was remarkable, because I was there when he testified before the interim committee. It was months ago, and the difference between then and now was quite remarkable.
Dale, you made the comment about some people think, well, maybe just a swat on the bottom. It's a good example of what we learned in the committee. We basically learned that if people don't get the proper service and are treated like a behavior problem, they actually withdraw or they develop behavior problems. And we may have a fair number of people in prison right now who are really there because they didn't get the services, or they were not identified correctly of having something in the autism spectrum disorder category. We assumed maybe that they were just belligerent or lazy or obstinate. And here we're finding this disability is really that characteristic. If they get the service, then they go down this track instead of going down the track into the correction system.
Senator Mathern, could you try to just define autism for us? What does it mean? What are the characteristics of it, of the syndrome?
Well, first of all, the term syndrome is used because it's a wide range. It really is not as clear as, let's say, you have a broken arm. It is a range of neurobiological conditions that on the one hand might have somebody very withdrawn, and on the other hand might have somebody kind of with the Asperger's type of conditions or very high intellectually functioning. So it's a disability that relates to the development of the mind, but it has a broad spectrum. It's not a clear, simple condition for our society to determine. It is a broad range of difficulties.
Senator Heckman, how does what Senator Mathern just described, how difficult does that make it for the classroom teacher or the parent who is trying to provide assistance to the child?
Well, I think it, anytime that you're in a classroom with a number of students, you're going to have students that are on the norm and students that are below and students that are above. And I think one thing for the teachers in the state is getting adequate training to see and work with the student. Every time you do a plan for a student, it's called an individual education plan. And that's very important because you may have 3 students in a classroom. They all may be diagnosed with the same disability, but your plan will look different for each one of them. And so the State Autism Task Force, the Governor's State Autism Task Force, has spent 3.5 years now working on, we have a state plan. We submitted that to the governor in July of 2010, end of June 2010. And we have been studying this. We've just put out surveys. We presented to the interim committee our recommendations. And this has been going, we've been studying this for 3.5 years. And so we have a bill draft that's coming in now. It should be ready to go in tomorrow. And
could you tell us about that, please?
Sure. The State Autism Task Force spent a lot of time. We've worked a number of meetings. We have 15 individuals, anywhere from psychologists, we have a behavior analyst, we have someone from the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, Protection and Advocacy, the Developmental Home, Pathfinders, UND, the instructional model from UND, and a number of others. We have 2 parents on the committee. We have a behavior analyst on the committee. And the 3.5 years that we worked on this state plan and revised it so we were ready to present a bill to this year's legislature, we came up with some priorities. And our first priority would be to have a state director. And that state director would be responsible for organizing the state plan into a working plan for the state of North Dakota for the parents and the individuals with autism. The second priority on there was to, and these are in no special order after this, we have some money in the bill for training efforts, whether it's school staff, community people that interact with these. It could be a variety of services. Maybe somebody from a human service center working with these individuals. We have money in here to support the training of behavior analysts. They're very short in the state of North Dakota. And so there's funding in here for that. We have funding in here for diagnostic teams, and right now the diagnostic teams are basically out of Minot State University from the Center for Persons with Disabilities. They've been going out and diagnosing some of these, whether it's through daycares, through referrals from physicians, through school referrals, and so forth. And so there's a need to continue that diagnostic service. So that bill is ready to go in. The task force is pleased with their work over the last 3.5 years, and we'll see how this rolls out, because we certainly aren't opposed to the other bills that are in there either. They are very important, and our main concern is to get some services for the families and for the individuals with autism, because it's not only children, school children, like Senator Mathern said, it's on through 0 to end of life.
How would you describe the state of services for people with autism in North Dakota right now?
Well, right now they're pretty scattered. They're not organized. Parents are having a time finding a place to go, a way to go, and so looking at a coordinator, that would be an option for us to get these all organized into one central place.
One thing that I was thinking of, Senator Mathern, when you were talking about, people who might be in the penitentiary who did not essentially get the service they need when they were small, maybe their problem stems from the sort of disability that we're talking about. I'm thinking, have any of you 3 folks started to think about the children that you knew when you were a child in a new light, the ones that were maybe a bit rowdy or eccentric or strange, or maybe you just thought they were rowdy or eccentric or strange or rude or whatever, but maybe they had this disorder and you didn't know what it was and didn't think about it.
And their families didn't know what it was. Maybe their families even got blamed for not raising kids that are very polite. And I also see it amongst the adult population now. I see providing these services for autistic children as a way of saving a lot of resources in the future. It not only benefits these children and their families, but it'll keep some people out of prison. It'll keep some people out of other types of care, and they will be taxpayers. That's important.
When I was young, I can think, I went to school here in Bismarck for the first 7 years, and I can think of one boy who would maybe fall into that category, who became wasn't able to hold a job, but he could quote baseball statistics, and so that made me think that he was probably in the spectrum somewhere. It was the only one that I can think of in grade school. I don't know high school. We were all strange. So
the voucher bill. Just we have about a minute left. The voucher bill. To what extent does this? I mean, does this represent a sufficient step, or should it go further?
Well, I think it is only a step, and it's something that indicates we're at least aware now of the problem, and we're at least trying to do something about it. We're going to spend a lot of money this legislative session, and investments don't just have to be in roads and bridges and buildings. We can invest in our citizens. This is a step to start in that direction.
And I think the task force's comprehensive bill is an option for us to maybe blend all of these bills together into one final product when we get there. And so there are a lot of good material that's coming forward in this session on autism.
Well, I'm hopeful that we can accomplish something. It is a first step. It's a start. We've done very little as a state in regards to this. It's a serious problem, I believe. There's no cure at the present time. I hope someday they can figure out what causes it, and there can be a cure, but right now treatment is the only option.
We've been talking to Representative Al Wieland of West Fargo, Senator Tim Mathern of Fargo, Senator Joan Heckerman of New Rockford about autism spectrum disorder. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, another exciting hour of the Legislature Today radio show is in the books. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow us at GreatPlainsNews.com. If you ever miss a show, GreatPlainsNews.com. They're all archived right there, and our live webcast happens there as well at GreatPlainsNews.com. On 550 K-Fire, our flagship for the Legislature Today radio show, plus our affiliates AM 1100 The Flag Fargo and Talk Radio 1090 The Flag in the Bakken. It's Teeny Tuesday, award-winning Peacock Alley Martinis, 2 for 1 until 10 tonight. Join us. Apps are $2 off, too. This is the Legislature Today radio show, and thanks for listening.